Good morning. Welcome back. This is Avi Nelson in for Jeff Kuhner. Happy Independence Day. Jeff has the day off today. We wish him well. Enjoy the holiday. We started talking about Independence Day. We'll get back to it, but then we talked about the situation at the border, and we're going to continue with that and the rather outrageous situation that we are confronted with. 50 to 60,000 young people, varying ages. These people, nobody knows, for at least I don't know for sure, how they got to that border. Somebody organized something. There's word that it cost $5,000 to $8,000 to make the trip for a kid from Honduras, El Salvador, Costa Rica, you name it, where they're coming from. It's a couple of thousand miles to do it. The kids didn't organize it themselves. But they're dumped on our border. Some of them are disease-ridden with diseases we don't usually see here. Some of them are undoubtedly connected with the gangs that we're being told is the reason why they came here in the first place. And the obvious implication is they want some kind of asylum or treatment here where they'll be able to stay. They'll undoubtedly then get their relatives, the parents who sent them in the first place, to come here as well. And we end up with a whole bunch of people, most of whom, well, all of whom don't belong here, and most of whom we don't want here. But, of course, there are politics involved, and these are going to be more Democrat voters, and the issue itself has galvanized the Hispanic community, and therefore, they're more likely to come out and vote in the fall, and that works to the advantage of the Democrats. So some pretty ugly politics here being played on the backs of the American people. We'll stay with this segment for a little bit longer. We've got some other things we do want to talk about, but let's stay with this. 877-469-4322 is the phone number. Text message code 680-680 and the email address anelson@wrko.com. Did get one email that I read. It was interesting, from Georgia. She closes with a line that I think captures it for a lot of us. And she says, "I've run out of compassion." And there's something about it, even though they're kids, we're just fed up with people playing fast and loose with the laws of the United States and the spirit of the country. Okay, back to the telephone lines. Chris, you're next on the program. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Avi. Listen, I think there was a miscommunication. You didn't hear the guy say that he called law enforcement. He called somebody in law enforcement. Not a friend. He didn't say it was a friend or a relative, but he said he called somebody in law enforcement. And they told him it was going, the buses were going to Salem, New Hampshire.
Right.
And there's only one way that the police could have known, is if they were, in fact, who he felt they were. Secondly, I believe what you said about conspiracies earlier in the show, but Avi, you know something? It's way past coincidence time. And you're talking about the 50,000 kids. Well, it's not just all kids. A heck of a lot of them, children, I think, in terms of single digits. A lot of these children are teenagers.
Yes.
And they're completely different from the teenagers in this country. These are teenagers that have got to learn to survive as individuals, if you will, at an earlier age. So complete difference, the teenagers from there to here. Next, there's not just 50,000 kids. There's some adults in there. And out of the 50,000, let's say, just say 3% are MS-13. That's 1,500 ruthless, extremely dangerous criminals. And we already know MS-13 are criminals because they've got to commit horrendous acts to become full-fledged members. This is the first thing on people's minds in today's society in this country. We are watching the actual destruction of our society, and there's got to be something done about it. And you know something? The people that are causing this are eventually going to feel the whirlwind because they're not completely insulated themselves.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said, Chris. There's a wide range of age. I fully expect that some of these kids, you didn't mention disease. We know they're bringing in diseases.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that some of them are gang members or have some pretty rough backgrounds. And you say the people who are doing this, who is doing it? Do you know? Because I don't know. Here we have...
this is just happening in a vacuum. So you're a political analyst, and you will go whichever way the wind blows.
Or
you'll make up your own facts on the fly.
No, wait a minute, Chris. Chris, tell me who has engineered this? Do you know? Because I don't.
You don't? You haven't done any research?
Well, you can do research. It doesn't mean you come to conclusions.
I see. You're the type of guy.
Chris, give me an answer. Stop.
With me. I'm a veteran.
Chris.
I'm a veteran.
Chris.
And you know something? I am tired of this wishy-washy stuff. Just like Cooksey said, wishy-washy.
Chris.
If you don't have the answer, you throw it right back in the other person's face.
Well, tell me. Who did it? Who has engineered this?
How long have you been a political analyst?
Oh, for heaven's sake, Chris. If you can't answer the question, then we'll move on. Look, I gave you your chance. I really would like to know. I'd like to know how 50,000 kids end up on the border. Who set that up? Who paid for it? Who arranged the trafficking? If you've got some answers, let's hear about them. It is certainly remarkable when a congressman isn't allowed on the facilities. Something is very wrong. After all, a congressman, a sitting congressman, is a representative of the American people. So let's get to the bottom of it. I can see who may be benefiting from it. But it would be nice to know the mechanics here. How did this happen? And why is it happening so quickly? And all of a sudden, it seems we've been swamped with these kids. 877-469-4322 is the phone number. Jay, you're next on the program. Good morning.
Good morning, Avi. Great job as always.
Thank you. Chris
without
wouldn't
a
think
doubt,
so.
it's definitely an organized event. I've read that they're picking kids up at the border who have clean flip-flops. See on TV, they have people jet skiing them across the river. I have two simple solutions. One, create a civilian corps that stands on the other side of the river, arm them each with a can of pepper spray. When the people get on the bank, spray them in the face, push them back in the river.
Well, in other words, prevent them from coming in. And I think not only that, Jay, there ought to be a fence put up, and if we need a double fence, so that's where, secure the border. Fences work. Charles Streidhammer made the interesting observation that fences don't work. How come there's one around the White House? Fences do work. They may not be 100% secure, but they work pretty well. There's a fence that the Israelis have put up to protect them from the Palestinians, and that's cut down on the crime in that area by something like over 90%. Of course fences work. And if there's some places where you can't put up a fence, so we have some extra patrols. But for heaven's sake, let's secure our borders. It is of small consolation that this country is so attractive to people. Things are better here than they are elsewhere, that people want to break into the country. Well, that's nice, but that doesn't mean that we have to sit back and let it happen. And by the way, with the kids who are there, even though they're kids, and of course it tugs on the heartstrings, but even though they're kids, we got buses, we got airplanes, we got ships. Instead of sending them to other parts of this country, let's send them back to whence they came. And by the way, just to how to deal with this as well, I did look up a little bit. In 2013, which is the last year I have, we gave $145 million to Guatemala, $88 million to Honduras, $60 million to El Salvador. How about if we say, we're going to cut off that money, and you're not going to get any more until you stop the exodus of these kids from your country to our borders. Mexico, $1 billion has already been spent. Another $900 million is planned to go from the U.S. to Mexico. How about we put some strings on that Mexico seals its border, and by the way, gives us our Marine back. There's some serious things that we can do if the President of the United States had an inclination to do it. He obviously does not. So as far as he's concerned, it's probably perfectly okay. They're not coming to his house. That's why I say if we put some busloads of kids and sent them to Washington and let the people in Washington, the politicians and the bureaucrats, worry about their children contracting additional diseases from the kids coming across the border, then we would have some action very quickly. But who's going to authorize that? In order to get the kids to Washington, the very people who have control of the situation, who don't want that to happen, are the ones who are making the decisions. 877-469-4322 4322 is the phone number. Somebody has texted in, was this the Tea Party that did it? Yeah, right. Patricia, you're next on the program. Good morning.
Hi, Avi.
Hello.
It's your old lunchmate from Mike Stoper's group.
Oh, nice to hear from you.
Okay, so a couple of things. The last two callers were great. Obviously, Mike or whoever it was who made the phone call to law enforcement, he clearly had to identify the bus, and the man had to have known where the bus was going. But I understand why you want people to prove your facts. Secondly, all the radio hosts are talking about this, but no one's telling anyone what to do. People are really frustrated. They need to start calling their local city councilors, their local mayors, their local state reps. They need to call the governor. They need to call their congressmen. They need to call their senators. Because if thousands of people start calling every single day and they don't stop, then they will feel the pressure at the local level, and of course it gets moved up. The White House may or may not be involved directly, but we know indirectly because they're letting them in. And Obama wants $2 billion to help these people out. Well, we don't have any money. We're broke. Our kids can't get jobs coming out of college. They have horrendous debt. And I mean, I don't need to inform and let the people know what's going on. They already know at the local level.
Well, let me jump in. You're right, and I'm glad you mentioned about the money because you did ask for $2 billion. I've gotten a number of text messages from people who said they tried to contact their senators, Markey and Warren, and have not been able to get through. So you're right, though, that it is important, and I think your point about contacting at the local level might be more effective because at the local level, first of all, the politicians are more sensitive to what's going on in the community. And second, they can do what Marietta did. That was initiated by the mayor, and then there were 200 or 300 people who came and blocked the buses and forced the buses to turn around. People have to stand up and say, we're not going to let these illegal immigrants come into our community.
Well, I'm glad you said that. That's a huge step in telling people what to do. But as a former elected local official, I can tell you if we get 5 phone calls on an issue, that's huge. But if we start getting our neighbors when we walk out of the house in the morning saying, hey, did you call the governor? Did you call Markey and Warren and tell them we're really upset? They start getting people saying that. They do it in the 4th of July parade tomorrow. But forget calling Markey and Warren. Stop calling your state reps so that they tell the governor, hey, I mean, believe me, if they got 100 phone calls a day at every level, they'd feel the pressure, and they would say, hey, please, stop it. I don't care what you're doing, stop it right now. But that's where it has to come from. And I wish, and it drives me nuts because everyone's talking about it. No one's telling the people and on a regular basis what to do about it.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned it, Patricia, because you're right. That's we can put pressure at the local level, and at least in your community, if you exercise your right to petition your public officials to do your bidding, that at least the kids can be kept out of the community, your local community, just as they were kept out of Marietta, California by the local citizenry rising up and saying we're not going to put up with it. Patricia, thank you for the call.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. 877-469-4322 is the phone number. 680-680 is the text message code, and email address anelson@wrko.com. Back on the other side of a break. Okay, let's go back to the telephone lines. Bill, who's next? Charlie, you're next on the program. Good morning.
Good morning, Avi.
Hi.
Always love it when you're on. I hope they put you on more as a fill-in. You're the best.
Well, thank you. You're very kind.
I saw some of those buses yesterday down in California. There were the people, which I think rightfully protested, to say we don't want them here. And but those buses had covers on the windows. They were like blacked out.
Yeah, that's right. I saw them too.
Right. So maybe if Mike had seen that would have validated for sure, because they don't want you to see that that's who it is.
I guess not. Otherwise.
Yeah.
I don't know why they would have buses like that, but it didn't fool the people in Marietta, did it? They knew which buses were which.
They got some kind of a word, and it's sickening what's going on here, and it's frightening, because you just say to yourself, I never thought I'd see this happen, where we don't have the gumption, or we have people that want to cause the borders to be porous.
Well, but Charlie, we have a president of the United States who has been encouraging people to come. You know, he's talking about how, we'll have to find a path to citizenship. He has communicated clearly that he and his party want to approach this with forgiveness. And what does that mean? That means to all the other people who are thinking about coming here, never mind getting in line, just go across the border, and the Democrats and the president, well, they'll find a way that we can stay. And by the way, some of the people are even mouthing what people think, what the agents think are scripts that they've learned, talking about how they're being threatened with violence, using the words that are generally used when people want asylum in this country, as if they've been prepared to say the right thing so that they'll get into the United States.
And in conjunction with the countries downstairs, down south in South America, there's programs advocating come up here while you can. And these things are just mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling. That's exactly right. I mean, if somebody had said this a few years ago, that we were going to have this problem, people would have been accused of exaggerating it.
Yeah, Avi, what was the purpose of Ellis Island, where my father came through? What was the purpose? It was to screen out the people due to health reasons.
That's right.
And it was just an amazing... It's just amazing, and it's awful what's going on. I have called, and we need to continue to call Congress, our representatives, and tell them.
I agree.
That's the only way we can do it.
At the local level as well. Charlie,
at this stage.
Thank you for the call. 877-469-4322 is the phone number. Well, it's a heck of a way to go and introduce the Independence Day holiday, huh? Celebration of the United States. It is, I suppose, remarkable that for all the problems that we see here, this country must be a lot better off than the other countries, even in our area in Central America, because they're all lining up to break into this place, not just to come here, but to break in. Dave, you're next on the program. Good morning.
Good morning, Avi. Let me just say that people don't understand the Gordian knot that's at play here, and that's the problem. You were asking for proof and evidence, and I'm telling you that it exists. And I'll try and explain quickly. I've been working in the international community with the United Nations for many years, okay? And people do not understand that our officials' hands are tied because of these international treaties that we sign. So that is why nothing can be done to stop migrants when they're on the move. That goes as well for the other signatory countries, such as Mexico. They are forbidden by international law to interfere with these people when they're on the move.
I'm not following you. You're telling me, I thought Mexico, in fact, I've looked it up, Mexico has some very strict rules about immigrants and immigration into its country. If we had the rules that Mexico had, we wouldn't have this problem. So
absolutely correct.
So why can't Mexico stop people from going across their land? Because
the UNHCR is on the ground and engineering this operation. They are under these migrants, and that's what they are. They're economic migrants. They have not been declared refugees at this time, although that is in the works. So people have to understand that there are many classifications of refugees, but economic migration is a separate category.
But they're not migrating once they come here. They stop migrating. That's the problem.
Right, exactly. And there is no way that you can lay hands, and even if our troops were sent to the border, they cannot lay hands on these people. That's what you have to understand. They're protected by international law. That is the Gordian knot that people, they're searching for. They're saying, well, why can't we do anything? Why can't we, our politicians move? Well, you know something, a senator looking to get into a facility, okay, it's nothing compared to international law. There is nothing that he can do to stop this from occurring. This is at the international level. We're a signatory. We signed and agreed to these terms.
Dave, let me understand this. You're telling me that international law requires that people can go anywhere? They can just migrate from Central America through Mexico to the United States and say,
absolutely.
here I am? Well, but if that were the case, then there would be no such thing as immigration laws. Then anybody can go anywhere.
Correct. Immigration laws is when you desire to go to immigrate to a country, and you want to do it the correct way. That is what immigration law is for. There are other movements of peoples that occur that puts them into different categories. And according to the categories, whether they're declared a refugee or have refugee status, or whether they're economic migrants, people can go online and look it up. Look up the UNHCR and specifically Google the terms about what's going on.
So what do we have to do? If we call them refugees, will that do it?
No, you cannot call them that. They have to be declared that by the High Commissioner. And it hasn't been done yet.
Who's the High Commissioner?
Right now it's Gutierrez. But I mean, the entire thing that people are missing is the international component. We are going around the world, understand this, for us to put up a fence or to stop these people, actually put our hands on them or block them in any way, goes against what we're over in other countries encouraging those countries to do, those nations to do. We're actually facilitating the mission of the UN to protect migrants when they cross. We're teaching troops in other countries to understand that these people have freedom of movement.
I see. Okay, Dave. Well, thanks for the call. I don't know what the international law says or how we have to change the wording, but whatever it is, we have to make it so that the world and the UN especially, which is pretty dim on most things, understands that we are not going to be the end destination for all the migrants or refugees or whatever name you want to apply to them. They're just not going to come here, or we're going to help them migrate back. How's that? We do reverse migration. We put them on buses and planes and boats, and they go back whence they came. And maybe that'll just help the migration, just change the compass direction. Back on the other side of a break. Jeff is off today. I'm Avi Nelson. Welcome back. Good morning to you. This is Avi Nelson in for Jeff Kuhner. Happy Independence Day, July 4th, 1776 was when the Declaration of Independence is signed, although some historical question about that. In any event, we've been talking about the illegal immigrants. We'll stay with that for just a little bit and then shift over. Back to the lines. Andrea, you are next on the program.
Good morning, Avi.
Morning.
I love when you fill in.
Thank you.
Avi, I've been calling both our senators and our congressmen's offices for the past 3 weeks about this issue. And I'm specifically asking, what is their thinking on this brand new influx of these people who I believe are being brought in by the president and who knows whom else? And I'm not getting any real answers. I said, have I missed their comments in the paper? Have they been on television? Have they held a public forum? Have they held a call-in? Have they said anything at all? And they're not saying anything.
No, I haven't heard anything from our distinguished high-level politicians.
So here's what I'm getting. I'm asking for letters, and I'm keeping them in a folder. And what I was told from Elizabeth Warren's office, since you referenced her, was that the Senators for Comprehensive Immigration Reform, which she states in her most recent letter, could reduce the federal deficit by $875 billion in its first 2 decades. Now, here's what's bothering me. These people represent us. I called the White House the other day, and I was going on about this, and I said to the kid who answered the phone, how are your calls running for and against? And he said, I can't give you that information. And I said, is this a communist country? I'm not asking for state secrets. I'm not asking you to breach anything confidential. I just want to know. He says, I can't give you numbers. I said, I'm just asking from your experience, sir, sitting by that telephone today. And he wouldn't tell me. So I called back all of our representatives' offices, and I said, I want you to look into it and find out for me why I couldn't get that information. Just a, mother-in-law type survey. If the kid says to me, it's 50-50, which I wouldn't believe, or it's 95% against me. I'm at least so far today. So no, these people are coming up for re-election for your listening audience.
Well, that's the point, Andrea, and they don't fear for their re-election. That's the problem.
But they're not, I don't hear anybody even coming up and running against them. But people need to understand that we're talking about this immigration business. We're talking about Lois Lerner and the missing emails, the missing EPA emails, the IRS, the NRA, Benghazi, scandal after scandal after scandal. And neither Ed Markey nor Elizabeth Warren nor Stephen Lynch has gone on the record with anything. The veterans, what do I see with Stephen Lynch? He's at the Brockton VA the other day saying he's pleased with the progress. But I called the office and I want to know what he thought about the 1,000 veterans who died.
Andrea, thank you for calling. The point, of course, is well taken. Almost enough to make you a Republican when you hear the litany of these issues. Okay, let's shift a little bit. It is Independence Day. I know we could continue talking about this, and there are people who've called up, and I'm sorry. And at some point, if you're going to do something else, there are those who are going to be left without having had a chance to weigh in on it. But at some point, either you change subjects or the program ends, and there's always tomorrow or the next day. I wanted to get to an interesting story that was sent to me by a friend of mine. Actually sent a few weeks ago, but I think it's relevant. His name is Mike, and he wrote to me and to others. He said, while changing planes in Baltimore, I happened upon an extraordinary scene. I noticed a plane coming in just after mine, being doused in water by a truck as it was pulling into the gate in what appeared to be a celebration of some kind. It was an honor flight from Denver, carrying about 30 World War II and Korean veterans who have come to see their monuments. This happened to be around Memorial Day. The whole terminal stopped to see them come off the plane, clap, and take pictures. Active duty military shook the vets' hands as they entered the terminal in a symbolic changing of the guard. Several of the vets had tears streaming down their faces. I was moved, he writes, Mike writes, I was moved by the tribute and had the privilege of shaking one of the vets' hands and sharing a smile. Volunteers on the ground shouted out the vets' names and their units, which made the crowd yell and clap louder, and he sent some pictures with this. And he closes by, Happy Memorial Day weekend to all of you. Please share this with some friends. And I thought it was worth acknowledging. As I say, it happened on Memorial Day, but certainly the sentiment is related to our celebration of Independence Day and the commitment that we have to our nation, which of course has really been paid for in blood and treasure, as well as through the service of so many people. And it's nice to know this isn't a story that makes the news, and this isn't a story that is going to galvanize a lot of controversy or even a lot of attention. But it's nice, a sidebar story that when it happens, and every once in a while, if you're in a public place and you see people going up to somebody in uniform and thanking him or her for their service, it makes you feel good that there are at least some people who are appreciative of what these soldiers are trying to do. Okay, new topic. Let me mention July 4th. I mentioned earlier, of course, everybody knows what July 4th stands for. It's the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Interesting that historians have disputed whether Congress actually signed the Declaration on July 4th, although Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson all said they did sign it on that day. But most historians have concluded that the Declaration was actually signed about a month later, on August 2nd, 1776, which sounds like a good reason for another holiday. And as far as coincidences of the day, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, the only signers of the Declaration of Independence who became presidents of the United States, both died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration. James Monroe, who was a founding father, although not a signer, died on July 4th, 1831. So he was the third president in a row to die on that day. And Calvin Coolidge, the 30th president, was born on July 4th, 1872. He is the only president to have been born on Independence Day. So, some sidebars to it. Of course, a day that is celebrated. There will be a concert at the Esplanade later tonight, fireworks. Starro Drive closes at noon today, so be aware of the possibility of some traffic problems. And we celebrated not only with a lot of national fervor and fireworks, but hot dogs and barbecues and a baseball game or two. So it's one of the premier holidays, and of course one of the few holidays that is celebrated on July 4th and not the adjacent Monday. An interesting poll that has made the rounds recently, done by Quinnipiac University, which, by the way, is not considered to be one side or the other. You know, some polls done by Democratic pollsters, others by Republican pollsters. Quinnipiac has the reputation of being down the middle. They asked a question of voters: whom do you think is the worst president since World War II? And the answer, the number one answer, was Barack Obama. 33% of the people picked him. 28% said George W. Bush. Third place went to Richard Nixon at 13%, and Jimmy Carter got 8%. By the way, they also asked the question of the best president since World War II, and I don't know, no surprise, or maybe he's gratified that the number one answer was Ronald Reagan, who got 35%. Next in line was Bill Clinton at 18%, and then John Kennedy at 15%. But notice the gap between Reagan and Clinton for best president. I found it interesting, rather remarkable, and encouraging that Barack Obama came out number one. And for all the criticism of George Bush and all the venom that was thrown at him, or the intensity of the dislike, it turns out that people are apparently beginning to get it, and more people now recognize Barack Obama as the worst president since World War II. And when you look at what's going on, it's kind of hard not to have him in first place. The last caller mentioned about the IRS scandal, which I think is one of the big ones, and the VA scandal, and the question about Benghazi, and the president just ignoring the Constitution and exceeding his authority or presidential authority by just end-running Congress. And his flip remark, you probably saw it on the news yesterday, John Boehner said he's going to sue the president for overreaching his authority, and Obama's response, well, so sue me. And Karl Rove had a good response to that. He said, how do you behave like that, insulting the people that you want to come together with to accomplish something? So he's just cavalier about the whole thing. The Supreme Court of the United States was slapping him down with recent decisions, including those appointments, so-called recess appointments that weren't done in the recess to the Labor Board. With regard to the IRS, a Rasmussen poll recently pointed out that 71% of us now think that the IRS is likely to have destroyed those missing emails in order to hide their guilt. 71%. That's a pretty large number. 53% of likely U.S. voters believe that the IRS broke the law when it targeted Tea Party and other conservative groups, and that's up from 49% this year. You know, you have Obama talking about, remember he said to Bill O'Reilly, not a smidgen of corruption? Of course there's corruption. There's criminality. Lois Lerner pleads the Fifth? Why do you think she pled the Fifth? She didn't want to say anything that might incriminate her. Incriminate her for what? About what? About her criminal activities. So, at least people are beginning to catch on. Okay, we have to pause to pay some bills. We do. Back on the other side. Your thoughts and comments are welcome. The phone number is 877-469-4322. The text message code 680-680. Jeff is off today. I'm Avi Nelson. Good morning. Welcome back. This is Avi Nelson in for Jeff Kuhner. Let's go back to the telephone line. Linda, good morning. You're next on the program. Hello?
Hello?
Hi.
Oh, did you say Linda?
I did.
Okay, that's me.
That's
Hi,
you.
Avi.
Good. Okay, hi.
Okay, and happy 4th of July.
Thank you. Same to you.
And I'm very invested in this country. I mean, my family goes way, 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 way back, and all my relatives served in the military in the Second World War. They were all in the Pacific. But I just want to say one thing about the last subject that's a little bit different, if you don't mind.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I have called, our different representatives. Ms. Warren is mine, and Denise Provost. She runs when she sees me. I mean, I see her in the store, and she runs away.
Maybe we should put
really,
you...
Literally.
If you're that formidable, Linda, maybe we should put you on the border and send all the...
Well, you know what? I would go down there. You bet I would. I am formidable. And I want to just say one thing. What I think people should do, and what they should do, and which they should do for themselves, they should go and get all the shots that they need. Flood the hospitals. If they're flooding the hospitals, we should flood the hospitals. Like last year, the doctor told me I had to get the shot for whooping cough. It says whooping cough, really? And it comes with 2 other shots, pertussive and something else I can't remember. And I think everybody that's within listening the area should get their shots, and that goes for you too.
Okay.
Have you gotten all your shots?
Well, as I hear you ask it, I don't think I've gotten all of them. But okay. I don't know if you're talking about shots in general or just shots to protect against whatever disease are coming in, which frankly I'm not sure. I know some of them are scabies. I haven't even heard of that. And there's a difficult strain of tuberculosis that's coming in. I don't know what else. I think we're just trying to figure out, as a matter of fact, what the challenges are to this country because of this swarm of illegal immigrants or aliens that are coming across the border, have come across the border. 877-469-4322. Russ, good morning. You're next on the program.
Avi, good morning.
Morning.
And happy 4th of July.
Thank you. Same to you.
I like that story you told in the beginning of this segment. Showing respect to World War II veterans demonstrates a grateful nation. And I'm sorry to say, but the 35% that still support Obama demonstrate an ungrateful nation. Because there's no question, you've got to be a fool not to realize that the president is definitely the enemy within. He is the Trojan horse. And thank God we only have roughly 2 years and 6 months left. And then we can give him a good kick in the rear end and say screw.
Well, before we get there, we've got to get through November. I think November is a very important election because if we, Republicans, can take control of the Senate, that will send a significant message to the White House. First of all, it'll block the White House from doing any more damage, and it will send a significant message that these policies, these excursions beyond the limits of the Constitution, are not going to be tolerated by the people. But I must say, Russ, that I'm concerned. You talked about the 35% who are still supportive of Obama, and it maybe even a little higher than that. The last numbers I saw put his favorability or satisfaction with the job at 38 to 40%. You're always going to have that group. And as a matter of fact, nowadays it's even worse because 47% of the American people do not pay income taxes. And that means that they don't have any reason to hesitate to vote for expanded programs because they're not paying for them. And, which party is the party of the expanded program, the party of the handout? It's the Democrat Party. And that's why you get these favorable numbers with Obama, because these are the people who want more of what you're earning. And Obama's the guy who says he's going to give it to them.
Avi, let's put it this way. November is the month that we get an opportunity to take Obama's poison pen out of his hand.
That's true. Well, we talked about he's got a pen and he's got a phone, and Lord knows he's been using that pen, and he's become extravagant with it. And I agree with you. I think if in November the Democrats lose the Senate, that Obama will be much more reserved in being extravagant with his going around Congress or just doing things on executive order. Because the other Democrats, there'll be another class of Democrats that's going to be up 2 years after that, and they'll be concerned that they may lose their seats. So they'll rein him in. But we've got to win this election. Russ, thanks for the call. Update on what's happening in our world, and back on the other side with another hour of Jeff's program. Jeff is off today. I'm Avi Nelson.
News at the top and bottom, talk in between.
Executing assigned host duties flawlessly because I can't do wrong.
This is AM 680 WRKO, Boston.
Good morning. Welcome back. This is Avi Nelson in for Jeff Kuhner. Happy July 4th or Happy Independence Day. I got a text message from somebody who was upset when I said happy, or the callers say Happy July 4th. It should be Happy Independence Day. Well, those two, yeah, get over it, right. Those two have become synonymous. If that's the worst that we have, we're in pretty good shape. 877-469-4322 is the phone number. Text message code is 680-680. Email address, anelson@wrko.com. Okay, this is hopscotching around for some of the, with regard to some of the interesting stories that are going on that are related to, perhaps related to the holiday. We should start there. I know that this is not Memorial Day, and yet somehow you can't think about the independence of the United States without coming up against the people who fought for that independence and have given us the country that is so attractive that people are trying to break into it. So on holidays like this, I always look back to the U.S. war dead, people who died over the years in various wars from America. The number one in terms of casualty numbers for American wars is the American Civil War. And the number that used to be used, that was fought from 1861 to 65, of course, is 625,000 Americans killed. There's been some recent scholarship that has been accepted by the community that has raised that figure to more like 750,000 killed. It amounted to, at the 625 level, it was about 2% of the population. So if you add the additional numbers, it comes to more like about 2.5% of the population of America died in that war. Second is World War II with 405,000 deaths, and that was 0.3% of the U.S. population. In World War I, we lost 116,000. These are not including the wounded, just the people who are dead. 0.1%. And the Vietnam War is number 4 at 58,000 Americans died. And number 5 is the Korean War, 36,000. Then number 6 is the American Revolutionary War, 25,000 estimated to have killed, but of course the population was much smaller. So that was a full 9/10 of the existing population, which ranks it behind only the Civil War in terms of costliness to the American population. Overall, if you add up all the wars that America has been in and look at all the deaths, it's a little over 1.3 million people. Most of them men, of course, who have died in military service defending this country over the couple of centuries plus that we have been in existence. And it's a sobering consideration that when we talk about independence and all that we have here, it doesn't come cheap and didn't come cheap. It cost lives, and of course if I did casualties, then there'd be a much larger number So, a moment of reflection with regard to what Independence Day or July 4th commemorates. Of course, at the time the Declaration of Independence was signed, all those numbers that I just mentioned were in the future. They were yet to be. But nonetheless, it has happened to make this country the great nation that it is. And I say that even though we have some serious disagreements with some of the things that are going on. I'd like to talk about one of those now. There's one of the important considerations that we have is what we call the First Amendment, the freedom of religion. And there was a very important decision that came down from the Supreme Court this week. It's called the Hobby Lobby decision, or however you want to frame it in terms of phraseology. But basically the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that in this particular case, they tried to make it a very narrow ruling. But it came down to that the people who run Hobby Lobby, which is a family-owned business of some consequential size, that if it was against their religious beliefs, that is to say the religious beliefs of the owners, to give, in this particular case, certain kinds of birth control in terms of the insurance, the health insurance coverage for the workers, the Supreme Court ruled that the owners of the company did not have to violate their religious beliefs in order to continue to provide these contraceptives. Now, there were 20 different contraceptive measures that were called for by the health insurance plan. This is Obamacare now. Of the 20, the company went along with 16. There were just 4 of them that they objected to on the grounds that it was tantamount to terminating a pregnancy that had already started. And therefore, the owners, didn't agree with that because they thought it was the taking of a human life. Setting aside for a moment, I'm not interested in getting into the argument about abortion or not or when life begins, because it wasn't our call, it's their call, it was their religion, versus the claims that the workers had that, well, we should be covered because we don't share your religious beliefs. Now, what's happened is this has caused a remarkable amount of controversy. The Supreme Court did not invoke the First Amendment, which said freedom of religion. What they did was they said this regulation, which came from the Department of Health and Human Services, was going to be overturned by the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, a law passed by the United States Congress and signed into law by Bill Clinton about 20 years ago. So they made it a very narrow judgment, which means, of course, there will be more cases coming up. What I have found interesting is the reaction. On the one hand, people have said, a victory for freedom of religion. We have a right to our own beliefs, and we should not be coerced to go against them just because somebody else wants payment. And on the other hand, the other side has been ranting about, it's an assault on women and women's bodies and women's rights. Now, Hillary Clinton gave a speech at some forum that was asked about this, and her response was over the top. By the way, I will step back to point out that she gets paid $225,000 for a speech. I don't know what you would pay to go hear her, but to me that's grossly overpaid, especially since when she does it at universities that are already strapped in terms of high tuition fees for the students. But in any event, there were some things that she said that were so over the top that I thought it was worth focusing on them. So here's a clip that we have, an excerpt of this. Hillary Clinton's answer to the question about what do you think of the Hobby Lobby decision. Run tape.
And it is a disturbing trend that you see in a lot of societies that are very unstable, anti-democratic, and frankly, prone to extremism, where women and women's bodies are used as the defining and unifying issue to bring together people, men, to get them to, behave in ways that are disadvantageous to women, but which prop up them because of their religion, their sect, their tribe, whatever. So to introduce this element into our society, look, we're always going to argue about abortion. It's a hard choice, and it's controversial. And that's why I'm pro-choice, because I want people to be able to make their own choice.
That's good enough. And she goes on from there. But did you hear what she said about women's bodies being used to advance men? Remember, this was an answer to the Hobby Lobby decision. And she talked about there are places in the world, implying that somehow the United States was on the path to doing that. And this is someone who has aspirations to be president of the United States. First, you could see the hatred of men when she talked about other people, men, who are going to use women's bodies for nefarious purposes, obviously, having to do with their tribe or their sect. But beyond that, it's a total distortion of what happened. Let's keep in mind this is not preventing women from getting contraceptives. This was just a statement of who's going to pay for them. Earlier in that same answer, which was a rambling answer, we couldn't have it all on, she talked about how contraceptives are expensive. Near as I can gather, they run between $4 and $9 a month. But before Obamacare, women were responsible for buying their own contraceptives. And it's not that this law or the interpretation of the Hobby Lobby decision is going to somehow prevent women from getting contraceptives. This was simply a matter of whether the insurance would pay for it, or the employer would pay for it, or whether women would have to pay for it on their own, as they did before Obamacare was implemented. Now, what's remarkable about this is not only the distortion of the issue, but the reaction, the political implications of this. I mean, this is generating a lot of energy among women. Married women last time voted for Mitt Romney, but unmarried women have consistently voted overwhelmingly for the Democrat. When I say overwhelmingly, I'm talking about probably on the order of 2/3, 67, 68%. And now they're galvanized again, and the Democrats are using this as a political issue to get them energized because, our bodies are under assault and our rights are being taken away. Now, it's hard to believe that so many women are so stupid or so, insecure that they either don't understand the decision or are paranoid about somebody is assaulting them or taking away their rights. You've got about 1/3 of unmarried women who understand this, get it right, and you've got 2/3 on the other side. The question is whether there's going to be some significant political implication come November even, because this group of unmarried women usually votes in low numbers of the off-year election. That is to say, in the non-presidential year. And if they get energized by this, could it have an effect in November? Well, I don't know, but you can be sure that's what the Democrats are going to try to do. And what's interesting is they have to resort to this over-the-top rhetoric and distortion of what's going on. It is just remarkable. But in politics, the perception of reality makes reality. And this may be maybe a galvanizing decision that is going to influence people to become involved where they would not have ordinarily become involved. Just remarkable that this is, that somehow the real world is just so distorted in terms of the interpretation here that people are energized for the wrong reasons. By the way, it is an interesting question as to why it is that married men and married women vote Republican and unmarried women as well as unmarried men vote Democrat. Now, you can get into some interesting psychological analysis about whether unmarried women sort of feel that they need the protection. They don't have a man or a husband, or so government becomes the protector. Becomes the father figure or the husband figure. You can play the game, but in a way it doesn't matter. It is remarkable that there is this divide and has been for a long time. It's not recent. Even when Reagan was running, when the first time I saw these polls, that was where the divide was evident as well. So your thoughts are welcome on this. 877-469-4322. Especially like we probably don't have a lot of women listening who are on the other side. But I really would like to know why it is that they feel assaulted by a decision that simply says you have to pay for your own birth control material. I mean, why isn't that the way it should be? Never mind whether the Supreme Court decision came down one way or another. There's another, just give you an example. We've got this clip somewhere, but I'll just read the quote. This is from an Elise Hogue, who's the president of NARAL, the NARAL Pro-Choice America, an organization obviously described as in terms of where it stands. And here's what she said, quote, what we saw today was 5 male justices essentially rule that discrimination against women is not discrimination at all. They said it's okay for bosses to make personal decisions about health care, which we pay for with our labor, unquote. Notice again the use of invoking the male. By the way, the word is misandry, misandry. You hear about misogyny, which is hatred of women, but there's much more hatred of men among the women. So first she invokes that it was 5 male justices, as if somehow their maleness was the consideration and not the thought that goes into it. And then it's okay for bosses to make personal decisions about our health care, which we pay for with our labor. Hey, the bosses, so-called, have decisions, and they chose not to go against their religion to pay for your health care. Buy it yourself. I mean, why isn't that an obvious response? But instead, you can see the political implications here. The attempt to gin up this anger with women with regard to some perceived war against women that the terminology that was used in the last election. 413 texts in, Javi, I guess my body has been under assault as long as I've been forced by society to buy condoms. Yeah, that's right. What about, it's a good point, after all. They don't know if the health insurance is going to cover that, but for all the years when it wasn't there, you had to buy your own. 877-469-4322 is the phone number. Text message code 680-680. It is, it's really disappointing, and I'd love to sort of get these women. I've talked to women on the other side who try to talk to their friends, and it just doesn't register. So you end up with this becomes a political issue of consequence. But after all, one of the polls that was asked, the questions were asked recently, would we be better off if Mitt Romney had won the election? There seems to be a lot of voters' remorse. Most people, the number one answer was yes, by about 7%, by a larger margin than Obama won last time. People now say the country would be better off if Mitt Romney had won the election last time. Okay, your thoughts are welcome. 877-469-4322. Bill, good morning. You're next on the program. Hello.
Pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. Glad you called.
You're right about a couple of things, and you're wrong about a couple of things. So you want to hear the other side? I'm going to give you the other side.
Okay.
First of all, it's not government paying for their birth control. It's their health insurance company.
True.
Second of all, it's not, these aren't like government takers. These are working women who have earned this benefit, health insurance, that comes with the job. So I don't fully understand why it is that they're not deserving of their full benefit that they have earned.
Well, if you're saying that when you say they've earned it, this is something, setting aside that Obamacare now is the law of the land, but before that happened, you negotiated an insurance arrangement with the company you worked for. If the company wanted to pay 60% of your health care insurance, okay, or some companies paid more, some companies paid less. This is a negotiated arrangement.
Exactly.
So if the company says, I'm not going to cover cover condoms, or I'm not going to cover a particular pill. That's part of the contract. You don't have an absolute right to get that coverage just because you work for the company. As a matter of fact, going in, you should know, if you don't know, you should research what the company pays and what it doesn't pay. It's like saying the company offers a week's vacation and you think, I deserve 2 weeks vacation. I've earned 2 weeks vacation. Well, that's an arrangement between you and the company. If you don't like their arrangement, work somewhere else.
That's the conservative position, and I haven't heard that up until that just a moment ago. The really conservative position is if you don't like the not full insurance coverage that you might get somewhere else, that no one's forcing you to work at Hobby Lobby. That's a conservative position.
No, and I agree with that. Do you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
absolutely.
Okay, good. Okay.
But the trade-off, first of all, has very little to do with Obamacare, because the thing that the law that was being challenged is 22 years old. So it's way before Obamacare. And the trade-off, it isn't condoms, it's Viagra. Viagra is covered under like 99% of health insurance. So the negotiation was, well, if you're going to cover Viagra and Cialis for men, you should probably cover birth control for women.
But the condoms...
22 years ago, that seemed like a fair trade-off.
But the condom is a closer analogy because we're talking about contraceptives, where as opposed to some kind of sexual stimulation. The equivalent to female contraceptive pills would be the condom.
Yeah, but the trade-off 22 years ago was Viagra for birth control. The other thing is that I've forgotten what the third thing is. But anyway,
that's okay. You did very well with the first two, Bill.
Bye. Have a good day.
Thanks for calling. 877-469-4322. We've all been there, by the way. We all make light of it, but you're on a roll, and then all of a sudden, your mind is blank for this important point that you were about to make. Sometimes it doesn't matter. You go back and get it. And other times it's a little bit embarrassing, but you take it in the good sense of humor. When it happens when you're young, you pay no attention to it. Then when you get older, people immediately ascribe significance of senility to it. So it can take on a greater drama than it's worth. 877-469-4322 is the phone number. Bill, you're next on the program. Good morning. Hello. Yes.
Hey, I mean, the one thing I have a kind of an issue with here is, why the Republicans or the conservatives, they would rather not pay for a woman's birth control, but they also are going to complain if a woman has a baby out of wedlock and then society doesn't want to take care of that baby and the mother for the next 21 years on welfare. I would rather pay for their birth control and rather than pay welfare for the next 21 years.
Bill, the problem is, first of all, I don't understand why the people can't pay for it themselves. I guess it gets over to a question of personal responsibility. You make it sound like the only reason the woman got pregnant and had a baby out of wedlock is because somebody else didn't pay for the contraception.
No, I want to make it as easy as possible for a woman or a young woman or young girl so she doesn't make a mistake and ruin her life and also ruin my life and your life by us having to pay for that for the next 24 years.
Birth control has been available. These things cost between $4 and $8 a month.
Address my question. That's what I'd like you to address.
I'm trying to, Bill. The cost is not the prohibitive factor. The reason that you have such large numbers of babies out of wedlock is because of irresponsibility. 70% of the babies born in the black community are born out of wedlock. That's not because they can't get access to birth control pills. It's because that's a decision, a choice that is made. And unfortunately, most of the time, the fathers don't support the children that have been born, that they've parented, that they've fathered. So, to say, gee, if I'd sooner pay for it, they won't use it. It's not a matter of the money. You could give them the pills. That's not why people are acting irresponsibly that way. Okay, pause to update what's happening in the world. Pay some bills. Back on the other side. For Jeff Kuhner, I'm Avi Nelson. Welcome back. Avi Nelson in for Jeff Kuhner. Happy July 4th, or Independence Day, coming up tomorrow. A couple of people have texted in that Viagra is covered for medical reasons. That is to say, it addresses a medical condition, which is different from the contraceptives. Let's go back to the telephone lines. Take one more on this subject. Jimmy, you're next on the program. Good morning.
Good morning, Avi. Also, Viagra is used to create life, when you look at it that way. But these two recent commercials, to justify it, these two recent Supreme Court decisions, like during a previous news break, Martha Coakley holds a press conference and announces that she's going to work in conjunction with Planned Parenthood to pretty much intimate they're going to circumvent this law. Who are they to do this,
That's right. Usually, when the Supreme Court upheld Obamacare, then you had Obama saying, well, the Supreme Court has spoken. It's settled law. Move along. Let's get on with it. Now with this one, we'll just ignore it.
Exactly. And she's using this, obviously, to run and to garner the woman vote, at the dinner table, women that would never be in that position of needing an abortion or wanting to having a child out of wedlock. And they get hysterical, and I say, no wonder women weren't allowed to vote. And that ends it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
But remember up until late 70s, all these anti-discrimination laws, protected, political affiliation was one up until then. Now they have non-protected classes. You know what I mean? Whatever suits them. It's amazing how these issues trump all. And what gets me is this Planned Parenthood is like a private entity under the guise of health care, but they're like a quasi-government agency.
Well, that's right, because they get a lot of government funding.
Like $1 billion or something.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And to say that birth control ain't available, they're shoving it in kids' faces in elementary school. The public schools are paying for it. It's a behavioral thing.
Jimmy, point well taken. Thanks for calling. There's one more clip I want to get to in this man-woman thing. That what you're going to hear, her name is Indra Nooyi. She's Indian, Indian, and she is the CEO, has been for the last, 8 years, of PepsiCo. And she was at she was being interviewed at Aspen, and a long interview, but there was one thing that she said that kind of jumped out at me, and I wanted to play it and share a response. So could we run the clip, please? Do we have the clip of Indra Nooyi?
She didn't care whether I was in China or Japan or India, wherever. She'd call the office, the receptionist pick up the phone. Can I speak to my mommy? Everybody knows if somebody says, can I speak to mommy, it's my daughter. So she'd say, yes, Tara, what can I do?
Guys, this is not the one. If we don't have it, then I guess we don't. Okay. It was a long interview and we got the wrong piece. What I was going to say is that she went on, her husband was in the audience, and she talked about, the question had come up about career choices and can women have it all. And she said, no, you have to make decisions. And she talked about at one point where in her career, her daughters had become teenagers, and so there was a strain, put on her motherhood. And she said, and about that time, my husband also becomes a teenager. And, so that adds to it. We have the clip now?
The biological clock and the career clock are in total conflict with each other. Total, complete conflict. When you have to have kids, you have to build your career. Just as you're rising to middle management, your kids need you because they're teenagers, they need you for the teenage years. And that's the time your husband becomes a teenager too. So he needs you. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, sure. You can hear the audience reacting. Everybody laughed, and she sort of said, sorry, they're looking right at the husband, I assume. And what struck me is, it was all very funny and giggly, and that she would say something like that in public. But I just want to imagine if the situation were reversed. Supposing the head of PepsiCo, the CEO, were a man. And he made that comment about, well, when my daughters were teenagers, and my wife at that time becomes a teenager too. And I bet the audience wouldn't have giggled. And I bet the women would have all been shocked, and there would have been hisses and boos, and everybody would have been upset, and the guy would have been in trouble with his board, right? That would have happened. Did you see the difference? It's open season on men, but women, by virtue of, you can do the analysis by insecurity or whatever, can't handle those kinds of jokes. But it's okay for them to poke fun at the husband, and everybody is just supposed to take it in good spirit. I don't think anybody else, I happen to come across it, but I doubt whether anybody else has even focused on it. Okay, I want to close the program by raising a question that's, brought up by Independence Day. If the founders were to somehow come and visit the country now, having been asleep for the 200-odd years, would they recognize it? Would they be appalled? Would they wonder? Would they perhaps say, gosh, I'm amazed that 230-plus years into it, the country's still there. We never thought it was going to last that long. Would they be upset and put off by the extent of the erosion of freedom? De Tocqueville, Alexis de Tocqueville, a great historian in the earlier part of the 19th century, made the observation that the American democracy will last only until people figure out that they can vote themselves largesse from the Treasury. And, of course, we feel that now. Now, he was saying it long enough ago, I don't think he was looking 200 years into the future. So I think, in many respects, what he predicted didn't come true in the manner he meant, but it has come true later on. And I suspect that de Tocqueville may have been correct, and the reason it didn't come true until later is because of something he could not foresee. I think that probably there's the natural inclination for people always to be looking for getting some more from someone else. And as the Congress passed laws, even in the early part of the existence of the country in the 19th century, you could begin to see already that there were certain interests and there were certain considerations that some groups were getting as opposed to others. But the reason that stopped is because of the wave of immigrants that came latter part of the 19th and into the early part of the 20th century. Because these were people who were coming from another system, the remnant of the feudal system in Europe, and they viewed the opportunity that America offered as a real place to go. And the terminology that was used was the roads were paved with gold. They didn't mean literal gold that you could come and pick off the streets, and they also didn't mean that it was a country of a handout. It was the gold of opportunity. And so the people who came by the millions, our forebears, the immigrants who came here, were indeed interested in a system that provided for opportunity. They weren't looking so much for the special consideration or the handout. And that delayed for quite a number of years, for decades, this march toward ever-increasing governmental authority. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the waves of immigrants, at least not in the sense that it was 100 years ago. The immigrants we're getting now, which we talked about at the beginning of the program, illegal immigrants coming here and in many respects looking for a handout instead of, a workout. Because the nature of the system has changed and the people we're attracting has changed. And it's frustrating for a lot of us. And it causes anger and it causes division among the ranks, even among those who have a basic philosophical or ideological perspective. They may differ on the route, the tactics. And so you get a divide, for example, amongst Republicans, the so-called establishment and the Tea Party, most of whom philosophically have similar ideas but may disagree in terms of what strategies to use. And all this happens when there's a fighting over the spoils and whether or not the government should get bigger or smaller, etc. So for those of us who are committed to individual liberty and think that government is best, which governs least, which is smallest, it's really it's a little bit disheartening, because we see this march, as it were, to ever-increasing government control. Every year, more laws are passed. Almost are never repealed. And not only at the state, it happens at the state level, but of course the federal level happens even more. And now we have, never mind laws, it's the regulations that are being implemented by the bureaucracy, as if there's a fourth branch of government. They're supposed to be three. The executive branch, the president, legislative branch, that's the Congress, the judicial branch, which is the court, but now we have the bureaucracy, which makes regulations of its own. And in many respects, those are the ones that are the most dangerous and the most intrusive. There are thousands upon thousands of these regulations being passed in the course of each year. Every time a law is passed, it gets implemented by the bureaucrats, and they impose the regulations, even what we talked about before, the whole thing with the contraceptives and the 20 different contraceptive programs. That wasn't in the law of Obamacare. That was implemented by HHS along the way. So you end up with this enormous erosion of individual liberty, and we all get used to having to fill out everything in triplicate and knowing that if we want to try to do something, it's going to take 6 by-your leaves from the selectmen on through to the state. And these kinds of erosions of freedom are not only, I think, bad for society, but they're very disturbing for those of us who have a commitment to liberty. So the State of the Union, and what do we have now? We have a president who embodies a move to socialism more so than any president in recent history. I'm frequently asked by people, do I think that Obama is evil and he's doing this intentionally and he wants to destroy the republic? I think his policies are destructive, but I don't think that's how he views them. He's not doing this to destroy the republic. He's doing it because he thinks that centralized authority and more government control will lead to a better society, a better country. I think he's dead wrong on that. But that's what he believes. I mean, he really, as far as I'm concerned, he's ideologically a socialist. He believes in the aggregation of authority at the governmental level. He trusts government, doesn't trust the private sector, never been in it. A community organizer. His background goes to Jeremiah Wright and Bill Ayers. So, we have our work cut out for us if we are going to restore the republic, because we do have to try to reclaim it from those who are getting an ever bigger piece of the action. It's going to do it for me. Cooksey, thanks for producing, and Ed as well. Have yourself a very good Independence Day. For Jeff Kuhner, I'm Avi Nelson.
News at the top and bottom, talk in between.
And you and I are here to tell them that's enough.
This is AM 680 WRKO, Boston.